My presentation is about a link between usability and security, how they interrelate in our products. How can we assess the usability of products that leverage a lot on security? And we'll look at various scenarios where it comes into play, what can be improved, and what are the disadvantages in each of them. I will also talk about B2B and how we use this there. And finally, I'll make general recommendations that would be useful to architects, designers, and developers.
Давайте поговорим о том, почему вообще происходят инциденты безопасности.
Let's talk about why incidents happen in security.
Это слабое звено в безопасности.
Often,
Если мы посмотрим на статистику,
people think that people are the weak link in security, and statistics seems to corroborate that with numbers. But if we were to really study these numbers in more detail, we'll be able to see that this human factor has a further distinction between human error or inattentiveness and trying to circumvent the system. And that's not because users want to do something bad for us. It's rather because they want to make their life easier. When I say users, I don't mean the end users, but also those who do administration of systems. You shouldn't expect that they always comply with the security that a company asks from them. And a user tends to simplify their life. It's natural. It would be strange if they hadn't done that. It would have been much more challenging for us to design interfaces. Let's now talk about how we can develop an interface that would be convenient for the user, and how is it related to security. Well, the relationship is as follows. If you look at this chart, you can see that when we implement a certain security feature, for some reason, usability goes down. Why that happens? Because when we implement a security feature, we want a user to take some extra effort, and often a user doesn't want to take it. And what we're asking of them stands in the way of their typical use case, typical scenario. And for the user, secure behavior is not the focus, is not the starting point. They interact with the product to solve their needs, not yours. And security is your needs, not theirs. Security is not exciting for the user. So whenever a new security feature is implemented, usability goes down, but not for a long time. Users are smart, and they circumvent the security that you have created, and they return to the previous state in this chart. So what's a user requires a security requirement? For a user, that is a limitation, a restriction. That's some sort of a punishment that a company imposes on them and asks them to comply. And our user acts pretty much as a capricious child whose parents try to explain to them what would be better because they care for them. They ask them to wear a hat in winter, but the user is confident that they will not be breached. That is about somebody else, and people tend to believe that bad things happen to others, not to them. But whenever we start talking positive things, such as winning a set of Japanese rules for a repost, we believe that we are going to be the winner. So to make the product convenient and usable, we've got to understand how those two parameters are linked. When did this study start? It started in 1999. When there was a research about why Johnny can't encrypt. They looked at the interface of the PGP software and why users failed to encrypt their emails, what challenges they had. The first challenge
пользователи
was that users
они отправляют зашифрованное письмо
could
или
not
нет, хотя вроде как кажется,
understand
достаточно
whether they were
очевидная
sending
вещь,
emails
но
encrypted or not,
25% пользователей
although
уже
that should be
не
quite
справились с этим
straightforward, but 25% of users failed even at this step.
как бы отправить
Then
это
they were
письмо,
asked
потом
to send the
получить
email,
ответ от
then to
собеседника,
receive the response from their counterpart, to have it decrypted using another key, so they had to be able to operate the software. And in general, looking at that study, it turned out that almost no one was capable of
И тогда авторы
doing all the
исследования
tasks that the system was
поняли,
requiring them to
что
do.
когда мы
And thus,
разрабатываем
the authors of the
безопасные
study
продукты,
conclude
мы
that
должны
when
делать их
we
удобными, но
design
по-особенному.
secure
Поэтому
products, we should make them convenient, but convenient in a particular way. That is why they added recommendations. They said
пользователь программное обеспечение
that
будет являться пригодным к использованию,
a software would be
если
usable for a
пользователи
user
осведомлены о тех задачах безопасности,
if
которые
users understand the security objectives that the system has. And not only they have to be aware of that,
как им это все выполнить, как это все сделать.
they've got to
Ну, естественно,
understand
базовая
how
потребность
best
безопасности
to do
любого
it.
человека, в
Well,
том
the
числе в
basic
интерфейсе, пользователь не должен
security is a
совершать
basic need
опасных
for
ошибок,
individuals,
и
and
должен чувствовать себя комфортно. Комфорт — это достаточно важный критерий.
a user should feel comfortable when interacting with the software.
Итак, самый первый
Let's now talk about criteria of usability in security. Well, the first criterion is about is in the term itself. Usability is convenience to use. And what is convenience to use? What is that convenience? The point is that security should not be obvious. It shouldn't be so much in the way as to prevent the user carrying out the day-to-day tasks. The second criterion is that security should be understandable, i.e., the user should be able to understand and select the parameters that they think are appropriate, while we shouldn't be making unrealistic assumptions about past user experience. We, for example, may make an assumption that our user is tech-savvy, they understand how the solution works, but in reality this may not be the case, and the user will get lost in the interface, would not understand how it works, and would make things worse. Another usability criterion is that security should be easily detectable. When we have a certain security feature, a user should be able to find it easily, should be able to do that when they need, rather than getting a system alert. And another important criterion, which is quite often overlooked, is obviousness. If a certain security measure is used, it should be obvious, it should be made available. A user should understand that, okay, so they have checked this box, has this had any impact? Has their work become more secure? Next, I want to talk about usability in various products, in various situations. And the first thing that I'll talk about is browsers, because browsers are the tool that we all use to work with the internet. And for me personally, that was the first step of dealing with this internet, which is full of danger. And so it would be good that we were able to use the necessary settings, although I don't fancy that a lot of people go on the browser settings other than very curious people or people who do research. So, going to the browser settings and seeing whether an unsophisticated user will be able to appreciate the setting and why it is needed. And the setting I'm talking about is the V8 optimizer. Honestly, I didn't know what that is, and I selected that, and I tried to figure out what that is. Well, this text here says that this is some engine that enhances the website performance. Well, I'm just a non-sophisticated user. I don't know what an engine is. I don't know what JavaScript is. But when I read this sentence, I understand that this is some entity that increases the performance of my tool that I have at my hand, which is the browser. And what I can do, I can either allow or disallow. What happens if I allow? Speed improves, and the accuracy of certain features. So most likely, my page will not crash, that all the elements will load quickly and properly. What would happen if I disallow? Again, the explanation here says that the performance would go down, but at the same time, the optimizer would become more resilient to attacks. And I understand as the user that I have to choose between speed and proper display and security. And the information provided here is enough to make a decision. There are users in any product who want to have control over everything they do, and they would meticulously look into that. So for them especially, we have the wealth of Google. But even though our browsers are now very convenient, it has not always been the case, and this is an example from the Internet Explorer. This is a screenshot from version 11. By the way, these are not very advanced settings. Those are very basic settings. When you choose the type of connection that you want to have, and you choose between a medium, medium-high, and high. Interestingly, the Internet Explorer made a decision that we wouldn't even give the user an opportunity to use a low level of security. So the lowest is medium. So let's look at what differs between medium, medium, and high. And what is medium and high? Medium-high, it does look a little bit strange. Okay, here's what it says, that it's appropriate for most websites. Now, what is most websites? I don't know what most websites is, especially as we are looking at version 11, that should be 2013 something. Do you remember what most websites were at the time? No. And if I open the web browser the first time, I haven't even seen any of the websites, so I don't know whether this setting would be good for the websites that I want to visit. The next setting says that we'll have a prompt before we download potentially unsafe content. What is meant by potentially unsafe content? There's a lot of such content on the internet. It could be viruses, it could be phishing, it could be some content not suitable for children. So what does this setting protect us against? Well, in fact, against nothing of that. It worked quite strangely, and it wasn't of much value to the user anyway. The next parameter is that unsigned ActiveX elements controls will not be downloaded. Again, I don't know what ActiveX is. I did read a little bit about it. I looked into this matter, but no explanation here. And the user had to find the information on their own. And if you remember how interfaces looked at the time, at the top there was a question mark and you get your help, but in reality this information wasn't available in the help. And in general, if we look at this setting, it doesn't give us an idea of what setting have we implemented and what level of security we're going to have. Well, we should have medium-high, but compared to what? Okay, so we've looked at this example, and let's now think of some hints or some pieces of advice that we could generate looking at these screenshots. Piece of advice number one: whenever you use any setting, whenever you use any
предполагать пояснение в контексте.
interface that is not familiar to the user. You want to place it into context. You don't want to put it in some help file which is hidden to the left or at the top, etc. If you can show this information up front, please do so. You don't want to become too basic, explaining every piece of technology. That would
пользователь просто поймет, что с чем взаимодействует.
mislead you. But it would be good to explain to the user what it is that they work with and how that influences on what they do.
Слишком расплывчатых и при этом слишком.
I would also recommend to avoid
Я говорю вот как там подходит для большинства сайтов.
woolly
Слишком категоричные формулировки,
language, such as appropriate for most websites, or too prescriptive language that threaten or frighten the user. That if you don't do that, your computer will explode. That's bad practice. Don't ever do this, especially in B2C products. Next, you want to explain sophisticated parameters gradually. If you know that this setting is something special, that only one person in 1,000 would need it, you want to place it down, just observing the simple rules of hierarchy. And another important piece of advice, please be careful with how you use terminology, because not everyone knows the terminology that you know. What is easy for you may be difficult to appreciate for users. They would have to Google a lot. So if you can do without special terminology, you would be better off not using it. The next thing that I want to talk about is the usability of authentication. I'm convinced that passwords is the worst thing that humankind invented, but sadly, for better or for worse, we didn't have a choice. And well, since they came up with a password, it means that that was the best thing they could offer. There was no biometry back then, etc. But now we have passwords still with us, and we can't do away with them completely. If we think about it, however, passwords don't fit with the concept of usability because it's difficult to invent them, it's difficult to store them, it's difficult to remember them. Well, passwords are plain bad. What could be the alternatives? How can we avoid the situation, or how can we go about this situation? Because authentication is quite a frequent process, and yes, we don't like it, especially as we log on a service that we access every 6 months and they ask for a password and you don't remember what the previous password was. The best thing that everyone would wish is to have a seamless authentication, to have Touch ID, Face ID, you name it. When Apple came up with Touch ID, they presented it from the point of view that you check your phone 10, 20, 100 times a day. Why do you want to spend time entering any password? So if we remember the curve that compares usability and security, not only they moved along that curve, but they were able to increase both security and usability at the same time, which means that their curve shifted to the right and upwards. So they reached a wow effect by this technology. And why were they able to improve security with this technology? Because previously, when users had to unlock their phone quite frequently in a short period of time, they very simply use the setting, do not ask a password for 5 minutes. And well, that's not secure. And here they implemented the Touch ID, which is required every time. And that worked. My next piece of advice would be that if your service uses two-factor authentication, you want to get the user interested to
лишние
use it.
телодвижения, которые вы требуете от пользователя.
Because any extra steps that you are asking the users to take are normally something that they don't like. And when I'm being asked to implement two-factor authentication, I think that, well, what's going to happen with me? I don't want to be bothered with that. So I'm a typical user in that sense. So you want to convey the value to the user. And in general, when you talk to the user, you've got to understand that the benefits and the value is not only for you. Well, for the business, it is clear, but for the user, the value and the benefit is also there. It's the minimum of effort and the maximum of outcome that they want to get. Security, they find boring. It's not that they're interested in. If you want them to behave in a secure way, then you want to present it to them wrapped nicely, explaining why they stand to benefit from it rather than you. The next thing that I can recommend is that once you registered on the service, you start to be bombarded. Okay, so you have this password, please now add your mobile phone, etc. Well, I haven't yet used your product. I don't even know if I'm staying. I just was passing by. So if you are asking of a user to look at a variety of settings, so nudge them towards that gradually. You can show them, okay, by the way, we have this, and if you add that, you'll end up with this. And gradually, the user would get to trust your system because you are not imposing yourselves and you are earning their trust gradually. We also have to remember the phenomenon which is called the MFA fatigue. That's essentially when a service asks too frequently to authenticate from another device. Alerts are being sent too often, and the user is confused as to why the second factor is needed. And in fact, it may lead to attacks because the threat actor may abuse the fact that the user wouldn't read the small print and will just hit yes. The next thing is application permissions. I have a story that when I download new products or new apps, I like how the apps ask me to grant access to anything. I like to study how a company positions that, because if you recall how that happened previously, well, it was something like that. You download an app, you open it, and you want to give permissions to access your camera, your geo-positioning, your photography, etc. And then you give all the permissions, and then you feel that you have been robbed of everything you had without receiving anything. Now, this situation is getting better. Well, if you recall how these banners look, often they would explain why this is needed, but it is good practice. And an excellent practice would be to explain why that is needed and what's the benefits for the user for that and why the system needs it. Well, recently, I had a situation when I installed an app for a smartwatch, and they were asking for access to my contacts. And I thought, okay, why? I'm not going to call people using those contacts. But in addition to getting access to my contacts, they said that they will be able to notify my significant relatives, my family, if I need any help. Well, I think that's a very good way to frame it. Because, yes, we all care about security, not information security, but the basic physical security. So I liked the way they presented it. But in this slide, we're looking not at these examples, but we're looking at
какие данные вообще использует приложение, какие у
how
него есть доступ,
we can
скорее
understand
всего,
what
вы не
data
видели эти экраны,
an
если
app
только не особо
uses
интересовались.
and
И эти экраны
what
взяты из
it has
мобильных
access to.
приложений.
You
я
probably
взяла
haven't seen those screens if you haven't looked specifically.
котором много
These are
функций,
from
естественно, много чего
application
можно собирать.
stores. This is
И
an app
посмотрела, как
that
выглядят эти разрешения в 3 различных магазинах. Если вы
can
посмотрите,
web
попробуйте
crawl
найти отличия,
the
то вы их найдете достаточно
application
быстро.
stores,
Хотя это один и
and
тот же продукт.
here
Он, по идее, не должен отличаться для
you can find some
пользователей, которые
subtle
скачивают
differences
из Google Play,
on various
из App Store.
platforms, even though this is
Но
one
на
of the
самом
same
деле
products and
информация
there
о том,
shouldn't be
что они
differences.
собирают, что они
But in
хранят,
fact,
здесь
there are
разница.
differences
И
in what they
объясняется
gather
совершенно
and what they
по-разному.
store, and the
Если мы
explanation
посмотрим
provided is
на
also
Google
very
Play,
different.
здесь
If we look
еще
at Google Play,
объясняется, что, допустим,
we
адрес
have an
используется для
attempt
функций приложения.
at explanation
Окей,
that an
это
address
понятно.
is used
Но
for
здесь,
some
допустим,
app features.
с левой
Well,
стороны мы
that's
видим, что здесь
understood.
просто пишут
But on the
список
left,
какой-то
you can
информации,
see that there's
но для
very
чего она
simply
используется,
a list of requested
непонятно.
information, but it's not
При
very
этом
clear
здесь
what the
очень даже
information is
интересный
used
есть
for.
момент, в Google Play.
In Google Play,
Мало того, что там есть этот параметр,
in addition
который
to
написан
having
как
this
необязательное,
parameter,
не будем на
which
этом
is
останавливаться, но также есть другие сведения.
marked as non-obligatory, non-mandatory, there's
или вы не хотите это объяснять,
further
не хотите
information.
показывать,
So if you don't
просто
want to
напишите
explain
другие
something,
сведения,
if you don't want
напишите что-то
to
там для какой-то аналитики.
explain what you need things for, you can just say here other, without explaining what that other means. Let's now look at another store. And here you can see that it is extremely user-friendly. Well, if you know English, you would be able to see that these are permissions for getting access to the camera, to the internet, to various alerts and notifications, etc. But why? I'm struggling to understand.
Значит, мы посмотрели на эти
Next, okay.
примеры,
So we've looked
что мы
at
можем сделать,
the
какой вывод мы можем сделать из
examples
этих
and
разрешений,
what
то, как они выглядят в различных сторонах.
conclusion we can make from how these permissions look. First is that it is still not standardized, and in various platforms they differ. The situation, in fact, used to be worse. It's good that now we can even see this information. Maybe not often completely accurate or completely honest. So let's learn from these examples. First, request permissions in context. You don't want to ask for every permission all at once, because the users may not understand why certain settings or certain parameters of their personal data is used. If you download Telegram app for the first time, and if you want to send a photograph, your request to use your library would only be sent to you when you want to update your profile or send a photograph, not after you start using the app. And again, as I explained, you want to explain to the user what would be the benefits for them, what would they get, not what data you would get for your pseudo-analytics, but what value they would get from giving this permission. And of course, you should give the user the opportunity to review the permissions and edit them. For some data, it is there, such as access to the camera. Yes, you can. Other information, not always, although it would be nice to have. And another piece of advice is to offer a choice without blocking the feature. If you ask a user to provide a permission, and it is possible that the user may choose not to give that permission, you don't want to lose this user. You should offer them some alternative way. Okay, if you don't want to give access to geolocation, you can enter your address manually. In this way, you will retain the user while respect their decision. Okay, and now this frightening screen. This is something that scares quite a few people, especially when they do research and they look for some international resources for articles to read. They get this banner when there are 8 controls in a very small area. So what do I hit here? What do I click here? There are
Ну, как вы понимаете, да, что это
various
запрос на
controls.
разрешение cookie-файлов.
There are buttons, there are switches, and there's a link.
Могу здесь настроить.
So what can I,
Ну, первое, что я с чего начну, это то, с чего
what settings can I change here? Okay, let me start with what settings you cannot change. Those are the mandatory cookie files. Even though this says that you can turn them on or off, but this switch is disabled, so not very clear why you want to mention it all together. Then there are 3 more types of cookies. I don't know how much you're aware, but let me explain to you. The preferences cookies
для пользователя более персонализированный опыт пользования сайтом.
help
Статистика собирает данные
users get more personalized experience of website usage.
элементы нажимает пользователь.
Statistics is about what controls the user interacts with and generating heat maps of the website usage. Marketing is to offer a user relevance, advertising, etc. So we have 3 options.
Те параметры, которые нам предлагаются.
We can change the parameters that we can see here. We can only keep necessary cookies or allow all cookies. And the allow all cookies is always highlighted in a brighter color so that we didn't read everything else. But if we want to learn about more details, there's a very small link that no one ever reads because everyone wants to get rid of this banner the sooner the better. I think if someone comes up with a nice solution of how to better present these cookie banners, I think that this person would be able to make a lot of money and they wouldn't need any other products, because if they come up with a good solution, that would be a wow solution for the market. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is the B2B side. In my career, there was a situation very early on. I was working with monitoring systems and various request management systems, application management systems. I was recalling my experience and I decided to come up with the top problems that people come across. And the first category is what I call over-security, extensive security. This happened quite a lot, because yes, there were false positives, and they were quite often, and people were irritated with them, but for some reason no one did anything with them, with that, because the people who could change those parameters thought that it would be better to have a false positive rather than a miss.
Ситуация немножко напоминает сказку про мальчика, когда он там кричал «волк, волк»,
and in some sense this recalls of a fairy tale when a boy used to shout, "A wolf is coming," and so often that no one was listening when the wolf actually came. So we were really getting tired of alerts, and sometimes the alerts were not properly generated or were not meant for our group. So it was quite a challenge to manage that.
Была проблема с тем, что
There was also an issue
для всех параметров системы
that for all system parameters,
требования безопасности. Оно заключалось в том, что
the same set of security requirements applied.
Ты работаешь с каким-то ресурсом.
And suppose you work at a particular resource quite often, and every time you get on that resource, a password is required. But what if I use this resource all the time? Can this be simplified? Would it be possible not to ask for a password, say, for 5 minutes, or maybe a shorter password would be required? And there was
те люди, у которых
no link between the user rights, because some people had more user privileges and some had fewer, and the interface did not
И сейчас мы плавно подошли ко второму пункту.
take into account that people with different levels of privileges could work in it. And this brings us to the point of interfaces. Often in security, you want to show everything you have, to show the user the full menu, because everything is equally important. What this leads to is that people overlook everything. We just turn a blind eye to everything. If everything is important, then we don't want to look at anything. Red fonts, large letters were used even in the less critical cases. So when we read those monitoring systems,
терялся вот в этой визуальном разнообразии. Было очень тяжело вычленить ту информацию, на основе которой можно было принять решение.
Very colorful environment, and it's difficult to identify the information that could be served to make decisions. And there was also a misalignment of the interface, and it often happens when a system is designed and then something else is put on top of that.
Там какие-то системные контролы выглядят совершенно
and the system controls look very differently. And you seem to be working in a coherent system, but when you cross the border, you can feel that everything is different, even though you're still in one and the same system. So what can we do about it, and what can we get from it?
Первый point про то, что очень много информации считается.
The first point is that there's a lot of information, and all information is deemed equally important. The solution is that you've got to show the things that inform the next decision. Say, an engineer to make a decision about what to do with a particular alert. If all they need to know is the name of the area where something happens, you only want to show that information. If there are other parameters that don't affect the decision, then they are only distracting them, especially if they are highlighted in red. And it's not this information should be there, it's just that you don't want to show this information up front. If at this point in time this information doesn't have a bearing on making the decision, then it's not needed. So in this way, we visually make our interface better, and we reduce the cognitive load on the user. And again, the idea is that users use these systems all the time. It's not B2C, it's B2B. So usability there has somewhat different criteria. What matters is not just convenience, but it's effectiveness and efficiency. Efficiency is how much effort a person has to invest to come up with an outcome, and effectiveness is whether the outcome was actually achieved, whether the user was able to do the main job that they are required to do. And if users work in the system all the time, some of them in the early hours of the morning, then a customization should be offered, and it's not about changing the color scheme or changing the look of the elements. There are some basic things that you have to keep. If you want to monitor 10 parameters, we cannot allow the user to remove them from the dashboard. But you've got to keep in mind that there are different monitors, there are different color schemes on them. People read colors differently. People read text differently, especially when they look at the monitor late at night. So we've got to remember that we have our own approaches to perceiving information. And if we can make life easier, then we should. Next is having a unified interface. Why? Because in security systems, the price of an error is quite high. And if a user is accustomed to the fact that if they hit a delete button, they get an additional alert, do you really want to delete this record? They always have the opportunity to think about it again. And what if you use a tool where when you hit the delete button, everything is deleted without any further alert? Well, you've got to urgently fix that. Otherwise, you'll be running into issues. Next, learning about UX metrics. For every product, there are methods of assessing the effectiveness of performing a task. The most straightforward one is time. How much time is needed to carry out a particular job. Say how much time is needed for an engineer when there's an incident and they need to look into details, where they would look for them, how quickly they would find them, and how they work with the system, which buttons they click. And another important thing is
подсказки — это не только про B2C историю,
prompts.
Это про B2B тоже,
Context prompts.
B2B — это обычно сложно.
Prompts are not about B2C, but also B2B as well. B2B products are often quite sophisticated, and I came across situations when some particular scenario had to be run in the system, and I asked my colleagues, is there a manual for that? And they told me, yes, it's probably there, but they didn't really know where that was. It's good if you have a knowledge base where it's all available and it's updated regularly. But it would be a good example if in your system there would be a special page
разместить сразу ссылки там,
for a manual,
где они у вас хранятся, чтобы пользователь прямо из продукта перешел туда, куда
the user could click to where they need right from the product and be able to go back without breaking the flow. What this would give us? As I explained, the reduction of the cognitive load, the fewer efforts you spend on navigating the interface, the more effort you can spend on doing the actual work. Next, if people understand that all elements in the system work consistently, they make few mistakes. They get used to the system. They get more trust in the system. They use it not because this is what our company uses and that's all you're left with, but they decide, they choose to trust it. They understand that the tasks that they have to work on, they can address in this particular system. And what this leads to is better internal security. Let's now formulate overall recommendations based on what we have discussed regarding B2C and B2B products. The first tip is to not shy away from engaging UX designers early on. Even though UX designers are involved when there's a questionnaire and when there's a concept of the product, but you can leverage them earlier. You can look what your competition has if you have this information. You can talk to your colleagues, those who came from other companies, what experience they had, what it is that they would expect of the new service that is being developed. And
очень часто они могут вам банально помочь с тем, как правильно задать вопрос.
Researchers could help you in formulating
the
question in the right way, because many software architects, they are good as architects, but
пользователями, поэтому банально здесь нужен
they can't talk to users.
тех, кто занимается этим.
That is why you want to leverage the assistance of those who deal with this as their professional competence. Next is something that I support wholeheartedly. I did come across that, and I still do. Not all elements work equally efficient, work as they should. And when I started working with this, when I started thinking about this, I think I started making more mistakes, paradoxically. And I started thinking more about this.
На самом деле все хорошо, но я считаю, что первый ключ к
I believe that the first key to better security is unification, because if everything is streamlined, then there's a very minimal probability if the person does something wrong. Next is user scenarios. Well, this is very straightforward. Our users ignore security, and we've got to make sure that they stop doing that. It's not that I'm saying that it should be the inevitable step between point A and point B. What I'm saying is that you want to implement the security when the user is prepared to consider it, and that would be causing them minimum discomfort. Another important advice is to minimize the consequences of decisions made, of the choices. If you ask a user to allow something, to turn on something, you should explain to them why that is needed, what's in it for them. And in B2B, there's an additional aspect to it. If your engineer works on an entity, if they can modify something, then there should be a tip that explains what happens if this button is pressed or that parameter is changed, so that an engineer could really understand what they do and they made fewer mistakes. The next piece of advice is to speak the same language with your users. If your users are ordinary people, then you should talk to them like ordinary people. You don't want to expect from them that they are highly literate in IT. If, however, your users are sophisticated people, you don't want to talk to them in children's language. Of course, they have some terminology, and you're welcome to use that terminology. If you oversimplify, in fact, that may confuse them. And another important piece of advice is to implement training and tips. We're all people. We may not know something, or we may forget things, and it's normal that an interface would teach us something sometimes. We shouldn't see that as a problem. I believe that secure development is very important. And all of our products must be secure. But in addition to them being secure, they must also be convenient. I believe it's very important to observe the products that are around us, to take notes, to find good practices and bad practices, to see how that compares to your product, and to never shy away from ideas to improve, because who knows, maybe you'll make someone's life better. Thank you.
У нас осталось время для вопросов.
We have some time for questions.
Если у вас возникли вопросы, я буду
If you have questions, I will be happy to answer.
Можете микрофон, пожалуйста?
Can we have a microphone here?
Добрый день, спасибо за доклад.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your presentation. My question is about UX and the user motivation to connect or to turn on additional security mechanisms.
Каким-то образом реализовывать через закрытие части функционала. Например,
do you think we can motivate the user by disabling some features and informing them that if you use two-factor authentication, you'll be able to unlock additional features? It's a good question. I like it. In our products, we use such an approach.
Достаточно интересная история, потому что у людей еще всегда есть такое желание, когда
It is quite workable, because people have this urge in them. If something is not available,
стремятся это
If
получить.
something is locked,
Потому что,
then people
ну, как там вот это вот
try to
запретный
obtain
плод
it.
сладок и так далее.
It's like, you know, the forbidden fruit is the sweetest.
Механизм прям может сработать.
So, to a certain extent, this mechanism might work. I don't have the information about how effective it is and how it was organized before this particular solution. We can do UX tests, we can do A/B testing to see what works better for the users. But in general, yes, that is quite a workable option.
Здрасте, Илья. А можно юзабилити для...
Good afternoon.
Ну, то есть, если мы начали
What
говорить...
about usability for admins?
При установке агента Каспера на Linux нужно запустить
say to install Casper on Linux, you've got to run a post-installation script, and to do that you need a file, and the file I was given was not correct, and I learned that only post-factum, and I had to Google to find the answer. Well, sadly, Kaspersky solutions have such things that are not, but that's not for users, that's for admins more. Yes, I have to acknowledge that such things can happen. There are no ideal products. I can't tell you much about a Linux product because I work on a Windows product. But I agree with you that whenever an error pops up, it's good to highlight it. Earlier today, I came across a situation when I needed to change a status in a messenger, and I wasn't able to do that because I typed in new status and I hit save, and it gives me an error, and I don't understand why. Is it too long or is it too short?
Я в итоге статус оставила как есть.
So I ended up keeping the old status. If you have examples
в нашем продукте сталкивались
of you coming across
в интерфейсе, то
some issues in the interface with our product, you are always welcome to talk to our support, or if you have screenshots or if you have any further information, I can submit this information to my colleagues and maybe we'll be able to address this
недопустимая ситуация.
quickly, because I agree that this is an unacceptable situation.
Привет, спасибо за доклад. Я сейчас, возможно...
Hi, thank you for your talk. I may get too technical, but in our company, a big pain point is CAPTCHA. What do you think about that? Do you think we should give CAPTCHA to third parties such as Google and give users the classic approach, such as finding fire hydrants, etc., or you want to implement some gamification there, rotate capybaras, etc. So on the one hand, we want to do a flow that's good for the users, but the cost of developing your own CAPTCHA is quite substantial.
Да, спасибо за вопрос, достаточно интересный.
Thank you for an interesting question.
CAPTCHA такой достаточно тоже интересный опыт, потому что сейчас существует достаточно много различных вариантов.
CAPTCHA is quite interesting. It has many implementations currently.
Честно, не могу ответить на вопрос, стоит ли делать свою собственную,
And I can't really tell you whether you should be developing your own CAPTCHA, because yes, we have jokes about fire hydrants, etc. They are weird and they don't work all the time, because sometimes the object may be in between the boxes. But the pattern is very clear for the user. They've got to choose a certain number of pictures or images out of 9, and they have a good idea of what kind of objects they should look for. As the guys in other presentations said, that sometimes captchas are so weird that people just think, I don't know how to address this. Whether you should develop your own captcha, I don't think so. Because you will spend quite a lot of money to develop. But the time that a user spends to solve a captcha should be minimal. Because if they have to solve a Sudoku to be logged on, they would never get to their business. So, and if a user only spends a minimum time with captcha, I don't think your own development is worth it. And if you don't want to use the readily available solutions, well, there's not only a captcha from Google, you can use other solutions if they are more pleasing for you. But if you have the money, you'd better invest it in improving your products rather than developing your own captcha. Okay. Since there are no more questions, thank you very much for having me. All the best and goodbye.